Welcome to For the Record, an unfiltered view on current trends and timeless advice for surviving in the aesthetics industry. Whether you're an injector, practice owner, sales rep, or marketer, it's time to set the record straight. Each week we cut through the chaos and showcase diverse perspectives and winning ideas from the best minds in the industry. I'm your host, Dr. Tiffany Hall, Chief Growth Officer at Aesthetic Record. Now, let's get started on this week's episode. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of For the Record. We're taking things today to our northern neighbor, to Canada, to talk with an incredible, super experienced, delightful person who has been changing businesses and doing big things for 20 years in the spa industry, from luxury hotels to high-end medical spas to even your small guys who are just getting started. But Erin MacNeil is the spa business coach, and she has made a big splash in the industry, working with lots of clients who I know that I think we share together. Came to our event recently with Accelerator and shared her business practice, her mindset, what she's doing, how she's helping clients, and had just a huge impact on me and how she does her business, how she thinks about growth, and how she thinks about operations. So I had to get her on the podcast. So she's here today to give us lots of insights about leadership, about owning a business as a CEO and not as a hobbyist, and really turning your medical spa into a profit center. So Erin, we're happy to have you here, and welcome to our show.
Thank you so much. And I love what you just said, turning your hobby into a profit center. That's what we focus on.
I think that is a big thing right now in the industry. Is everyone's like, let's get into med spas. I'll do a part-time job. It'd be so fun, extra cash. I'm like, no, this industry is a beatdown. It's hard. It's hard as hell. It is not a part-time job. It's a full-time gig. And I think you've spent so much time in five-star things, from hotels and luxury brands, that you know this inside out, how hard it can really be. So give us an idea of what you've been doing for 20 years, because you have such a really cool background. I want to hear all about it.
Yeah. So the short and end of it is, I started out in the industry as an esthetician. And my main goal was like, how can I get a business education through this industry? And so thankfully, when I joined, it was just at the boom of med spas. And so I went from esthetician to laser tech to trainer to manager. And then when I left the company that I was with in 2012, I moved to Bermuda. There were no med spas there. So I had to kind of start from scratch and go back to my traditional roots of traditional aesthetics. And I got a job at a luxury hotel as a spa director. And the major thing that I had learned in the few years before that was how to really work for the sale, how to really gain clients and do all of that. And through that, I had a great mentor who taught me a lot of ins and outs about running the business, becoming a leader and stuff like that. So I applied a little bit of that small business, acumen to that more corporate resort style luxury spa. And turns out I was able to turn around that location, which got wind in our, I shouldn't say our, but in Hong Kong, where the head office was. And they were like, who's this girl in Bermuda? So they actually brought me into California. They brought me into Thailand, offered me a position in Beijing. And eventually I ended up in Hong Kong. So I was helping to recover spas that had, little to no profit, or I was launching brand new ones. So through all of that experience, what I realized was I hit the top of that corporate ladder. The view wasn't as great as I thought it was going to be. And so I figured I could take all that I had learned over that 20 years, being a provider, doing the services, and learning the leadership and the business acumen that I needed to turn a really handsome profit and grow practices and grow teams. I could actually turn that into an online course. And so when COVID happened, it was the perfect opportunity for me to take a step aside and launch my business. So that's what I did.
Well, and I love your name. I think, we talk about this is a medical industry all the time. I'm sure you hear that. This is medical. But at the end of the day, where do you want to go as a person? The spa. Where do you want to go spend your time when you relax? Where do you want to feel like you're your best self at the spa? And I think at the end of the day, we lose that in some cases, that while this is a medical environment, it's a medical spa, and there has to be some luxury underbelly somewhere that makes you feel welcome and relaxed and happy, because then you open up your wallet and you spend money. I mean, there is a part of it that's important, but also this idea of a business coach. We have coaches in our lives doing all kinds of things, right? We have therapists, we have coaches in sports, we have mentors at work. You need a coach in your business unless you come to the table as an expert in business, which no one is, by the way. Even if you have an MBA from Harvard, you're not. No one is. You need a person to come alongside you and be your guide and help you. So I love your name. And I read on your site it's about like the most searched term is small business plan. But it's such a great name because I think it brings in the idea that this has to be this luxury feel and very high touch and client facing, but also it's a business, sis. You got to get out there and get it done. So it kind of marries the whole thing together. So I just think from the get go, I just knew I was going to like you, and I did. You were fabulous on stage. So
Thank you. Well, I wanted to have spa in the name, one, because again, SEO, but really, I found that in medical practices, and you probably find this too, is if you came from a traditional medical background or like a hospital background, you don't necessarily have those touch points of service that really add that pampering effect. And just because you're offering a medical grade service doesn't mean that you can't make it luxurious or make it pampering or make people feel that there's a lot of value there. And that also is normally that element of luxury, that element of pampering is what allows you to elevate your price point. So there's a lot to be said for the medical spa that opens that can transition from just being like more of a sterile practice where you've got white walls and fluorescent lighting and it's very, medicinal, as opposed to really feeling like, as you mentioned, that luxury, that pampering. And let's get real, in medical aesthetics, the price point is not low. And so you want the value that that client feels to be elevated. And when I think about luxury, luxury isn't about adding all of the bells and whistles or making it cost you more as a business owner, but rather those thoughtful touch points that make people feel seen, heard, and understood. And so having spa in the name makes people feel like there's an element of luxury. But again, I agree with you around the business coaching. It's so interesting how some folks are a little bit reluctant to get a coach, but I get DMs all the time that's like, Erin, what's the shortcut? How do I get there faster? And if you want to get there faster, you need a coach, you need a guide, you need a mentor. That is what I've come across. That's the only shortcut there is. And even then, it's still not necessarily a shortcut. You still have to put in your time and your energy, and you have to put in the practice and implement and refine. But the reality is, like, if you're looking for a shortcut, that's the only one that really works in the long run.
yeah, I'm gonna say a very unpopular thing right now, Erin. I never like to be controversial, but what you said just kind of made me think about it. Is I see on Instagram all the time about we charge so much because of our experience and our skill set and all these things. To me, I get that. Like I get the fact that that's not just product, but everyone. That's what allows us all to charge more, right? That's what says for the industry we can charge more than the cost of the product because we all have skills and abilities and whatever else. But if you justify your cost with that alone, you will not survive because the person down the street is charging the same thing, but doing these kinds of things, these luxury touches, these high end, make them feel good, having flavored water in the lobby, doing the aftercare massage that feels nice and is relaxing, whatever those things may be in the practice. If they add even a small layer of luxury and the price point is the same, they've created so much more value than you could ever create by just measuring skills alone. Skills are not enough. Skills are enough for us all to say we can charge more than just the cost of goods, but I can't charge more than you if you're doing all these extra things. I think as a competitive advantage, if you're trying to look at your competitor and say, why am I not getting the clients? I'm charging less because she's able to charge more because she's doing more. It may not be costing her more, but she's doing more in the way of the patient experience that maybe you're not doing. So we forget this all the time, Aaron. We get so caught up about skill set and outcomes. Like, yes, but that's base level. We should all be great at what we do. How do you make the experience also great? I think we just neglect that in many cases, not even in medical, just in general, even in our business, right? Because we all get so busy. We're doing things like, oh, one more high touch thing. I can't do any more high touch. But I think you have to now because of, to your point, spa's in the name, but also it's a competitive advantage.
I 100% agree. It's so interesting. And here's where I think also we don't notice these obvious things that are right in front of us, such as everyone wants to automate. Now, I'm all for use AI to help you automate as much as possible, but we've gotten to a point where maybe we're too automated or we're so used to doing the bare minimum but expecting the most from our clients. Like we want them to opt in, and really, have we earned that? like, what is the experience? And so I 100% agree with you that if you want your clients to spend more with you, you really have to walk through what is that client or patient journey from start to finish. What does it feel like when I arrive? What does it feel like when I'm leaving? Did you pay attention to lighting, sound, scent? Did somebody get up and greet me? Like, none of that, what I just said, costs you extra money. It costs you a thought process and some training with your team. But the added value for that client who walks in and is immediately recognized or acknowledged, or is offered a beverage or a warm towel, even if someone just gets up to greet them, right? Because so many people are used to a greeting that looks something like this, where someone's on their phone and then they're like, oh, hi. And then they, it's just a different feeling. And so, yeah, if you want to be competitive, you don't want to just compete on price, because price then devalues the overall experience, right? Or I find anyway, if you're trying to go high end luxury. But if you're really able to walk through with your team, what are all of those little touch points that make our clients really feel like we care, that they're here, that we value, that they took the time? Because, like, let's get real again. During COVID, we all survived without clinics being fully open, right? And so you have to know now that there are options, or people might just not want to come. And if the experience really isn't there, it's going to be very difficult for you to compete.
I think this really shows its ugly head is in retail. I know I can buy on Amazon, right? Almost all things can be bought on Amazon. But if you give me my AM, my PM regimen, you call me, make sure that I'm doing well. You put it on me in the clinic and say, "Oh, feel how luxurious this is." Oh, it's felt, all the things that you do that are high touch that you do in a department store. I worked for dealers for years. If you give me that experience, I will buy it from you right then, because I trust that you'll help me if it doesn't work, or that you'll help me make sure that it does work. Where if I go to Amazon and I get none of those experiences, it's like, well, I'm on my own out here in the middle of no man's land. I think if you're having a retail struggle in your practice and you can't move retail off the shelf, look at that part of what you're doing. Are you giving luxury language? Are you giving luxury experiences? Because if you do, then Amazon isn't even part of their mindset, because they need the value that you're bringing around what they're buying and how to use it and what to do with it. I just think that's one of those places where you've worked in a obviously luxury environment. When you work in a luxury retailer, you learn all those things. How to use, we don't say clinics, we say beauty puff. We use all these luxury words and things because we want them to never think about the competitor, only think about us. But it requires you to earn the business. And I think we don't always have time to earn business. And it's really about your staff and being well trained and being committed to the mission, which is a whole different topic. We're going to get into that in just a second. But I just think luxury is a retail deal. You got to be luxury all the time.
100%. And in when we look at luxury spa resorts, okay, so I used to help open and launch from concept to operation. And so a lot of their high touch points are in that actual retail experience, where the retail is actually a whole experience of itself, right? That everything is high touch. They need to be able to touch it, smell it, feel it. And here's the other thing that I like, to your point, I feel like it's a lost art in terms of how do I retail? How many times do you go into a store, and it could be, a med spa or a retail portion of it, or even just a regular store, and somebody recognizes you and says, oh, can I help you out? Now, again, in retail, a regular retail store, you might find that a bit annoying. But in a spa environment, a med spa environment where we're talking about medical grade product, like, you need your team to get up and serve that client. That, imagine what it took for that person to take time out of their day. They drove over here, maybe through traffic, right? Or they live on the other side of town. They made an effort. And then sometimes I see that someone sitting at the reception desk couldn't even be fussed to get up and go help them. And it's like, that's 5 steps away. That's a lost opportunity. And so, yeah, I think you're right, Tiffany. It's like, if you don't have the right internal processes, or you haven't done enough training, and you just assume that your team knows what to do, but they're not doing it, then you need to input some training there.
Yeah, if the numbers don't move, I don't care how good of a coach you are in your practice, how much you're telling people to do it, they're not doing it, or the numbers would move, right? We know if they're doing what we've asked and what we've modeled, that things would be going in the right direction, and they're not. Which brings us to one of the things I think that you talk about, Erin, a lot that's really important to me, and one of the things that's close to my heart, which is really about leadership in business. And leadership is a concept. I think we talk about warm and fuzzy. It's like, oh, leadership. It's kind of a trite thing now. It's not taken seriously, but for me, it's like one of the most important things you do. It moves you from a manager to a CEO, from a hobbyist to, a true legitimate owner. And it's about leading your practice, your people, even your patient journey, your financials, your vendor relationships. Like, it's managing and leading are not the same thing. And I think that you've got such good content around that and just good experiences around that, especially as I mentioned here, hiring and like how do you hire and onboard and hold them accountable to things. So as you're out in your practices and you're talking with newer owners, is that a gap that you see often? And how do you help someone to figure out that leadership is maybe not inherently, it's not all naturally born for all of us, so to kind of learn it? Where do they start with that?
Yeah, 100%. There are, deemed natural born leaders. Those are people who are more what I would consider a self-starter. Leaders are someone who can then take themselves out of the position they're used to excelling at on their own, and then recreating that same success through other people. So you really, when you move into leadership, it's definitely a skill set and really good leadership. So I think people can be managers because it's really like a do as I say and don't question me, which isn't difficult to do. That's not a skill set. But leadership in itself, if you are a high performer, so let's just say you're a solo injector at the moment and you're a high performer, a lot of the time they don't lean into the leadership uh, skills or values that they need to, because they assume that the next person that comes into the practice, another injector, or maybe it's a medical esthetician, or maybe it's even just an admin person with some experience. The problem that I see the most is that there's a high assumption that that person knows what to do, that they already come with like the handbook ready and studied. And most of the time, if you've started a practice and you started for whatever reason, it doesn't matter, but you don't have a very clear vision, mission, values, or a clear direction of what is the value system here, what do we what are we striving for, it's really hard to get the right people, first of all. And it's hard to get somebody to perform the way you perform because they don't necessarily understand, one, the expectation, and two, what is this all for? What direction are we going in, right? So I find more people need to have purpose, impact, and meaning behind what they're doing for work. And new leaders just assume that because you have a designation or because you have a certification, that you already come well experienced and that you can read my mind, right? And that's the biggest gap that I see, is that there's too much assumption and way too much room for that new hire to read that person's mind, right? Just because they're a professional. But this is where we really lean into what our standards are. And when we look at standards, so if you look at some of your most favorite brands to interact with, it's probably because they have a certain standard of service or standard of quality, standard of consistency, and therefore it's repeated over and over again, which makes you rely on that brand and makes you fall in love with it. So a lot of new leaders don't necessarily hire the right people or move into that leadership skill set because they haven't even really outlined what their standard of practice is. They hold it up here, but they haven't yet communicated what that is. And therefore, if you are doing like a show and tell kind of training where it's like, oh, just watch what I do, and there's no tools and there's no resources and there's no structure, it's not a surprise that a new hire might actually not become successful or might not pass a probationary period because they are falling short because they didn't know what the expectation was. So it's definitely a skill set. And I think I say to anyone that we coach, it starts with you. If you are a high performer and you feel that the rest of the people on your team have to behave exactly like you, that's the wrong thought, right? Because you probably know this, Tiffany, as you grow a business, you don't need to necessarily multiply just your own skill set. You have to multiply the standards, the values, the vision of what you want to accomplish through other people's skill sets. And so that's where I find a big gap, is that they don't necessarily have the tools needed to train someone properly, but they haven't necessarily also laid down that foundational value system or structure to really be able to execute a training properly.
So much to unpack there, sister. So many things. We here believe in SOPs, but that's a dirty word. I think because my team is so conditioned to that word, they know what we mean. But if you're in a med spa and you say SOP, they're thinking adverse events, protocols for treatment. I think you should erase that letter combo from your mind and think about brand standards is what you say instead. I think about like at a high-end hotel. When you are a concierge there or you are, one of the people who serves the dinner service, you are taught the standard. Like you wait to set the table together, like 3, 2, 1, we all do it together. If you've ever gone to like 11, what's it, 11 Madison, the thing in New York, whatever that place is called,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a symphony. They all walk together, they move together, their hands are together. That is not an SOP. It is, in technical terms, an SOP, but it is their standard of operation for their brand, for their customer or client promise. I think in a med spa, we talk about SOPs a lot for processes, like getting things from checking in your inventory to how you track your procedures. But your front desk and you're standing up for retail and you're having an interactive retail experience, that's a brand standard. And I think we communicate it in such a different way that people don't take it seriously. It's like we just do that. That's what we do here. We just do this here every time, all the time. It's not an SOP. It's not this. It's just what we do. It's who we are in our DNA. And I think if you're a leader, that's a hard thing to get people to buy into unless you are constantly passionate about it. You are relentless in your pursuit of it being done excellent every day. It's like what you live and breathe. Because in that case, when the person walks in the front door of the med spa, that front desk girl can't get up fast enough. And she's running over there with the water in her hand, trying to get it to them, saying, "How was your day? Oh, was your trip long? Did you have all the things we want them to do." But that starts with you at the top knowing what to do. And I think it goes back to the coach is you may not know that. You may not be a person who's ever had a luxury experience in your whole life or a high-end experience to even know what you don't know yet. So I think if we expect our practices to operate in this sort of Four Seasons Ritz-Carlton, mindset, but we ourselves don't come to the table like that and we're the person in charge, we've got to go seek help somewhere else. Like we've got to go figure out what good looks like to even try to make our employees become good. And I think there's a huge gap in that too, because in the hospital you don't have that, and like in your family clinic you don't have that. We are a different animal, a different beast, and so I think it just takes a different kind of skill set. And then the last thing I think you said there about high performers, I am a big believer that the person who's the best performer may not be the best leader.
Mm.
Here we work on a meritocracy. Like I don't think tenure matters at all. Frankly, that sounds bad. I probably get hate mail. I don't care how long you've worked here. If you're good, you're good. And we'll figure it out. And also, if you're the best pie maker, you may not be the best person to inspire the other pie makers. You might be the best person to go do it all day long because you're a high performer, but you're not the person to lead the charge. I think about coaches like gymnastics. We've watched in the Olympics. The person who coaches all the Olympians was not the Olympian. They're the great coach, but they're not Simone Biles, but she needs them and they need her. They coexist together for different reasons. And so I think we do a concern, I always have one here, about if you're the best person on the team, it doesn't mean you get to become the leader. You've got to prove that you can lead the others. And that's a totally different thing than being the best injector. So I don't know if you ever see that when you're out, but I just think I see that a lot where it's like the best injector is a leader. Well, I don't know if that's a good idea. Are they the right fit for our brand kind of thing? So
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Tiffany, on it doesn't necessarily go to the person with the longest standing experience. And the reason why, and I learned this really early in my career with my first mentor, he said there's a difference between having 20 years of experience and 20 years of the same experience. And so what happens is, if you have somehow communicated that the people who just have been there the longest have the most value, that is going to actually stunt the growth of your business because again, they might have been in that more processor role for a very long time, but it doesn't mean that they help move the needle forward. We all need the processors, don't get me wrong. But I totally agree that, you have to have some kind of meritocracy where we really move forward based on results, and the result doesn't have to come from me, although I'm the boss or I'm the leader, I'm the CEO or whatever. I don't have all the ideas. I'm just here to make sure that all the right ideas get to the table and that they get heard. And so really clarifying that. But just to go back to what you mentioned about, new injectors, right? And if you want to have that high level experience, or you want to, like, let's just say new clients, you want to attract new clients, you want to retain clients. The thing is, you mentioned Ritz-Carlton, Four Seasons, and standards. Well, it's really difficult for you to get your front desk girl to stand up and greet someone if you yourself haven't even decided in your mind that that's how we do it here. And many things get missed because the owner, aka normally the lead injector, right, who happens to be a on accident CEO, they don't really think about the whole process of like, what do I want that patient or client journey to actually feel like? And how can I differentiate? And really and truly, the differentiation from business to business is your standards. And so the way that we explain it is Your standards are what you do, and your SOPs are how you perform those standards. So it's standards are what we do, SOPs are how we do it. It's just to make sure that every business needs the standard, and then they need the list of how to execute that standard.
A job aid. I mean, we have that here a lot where it's like, my mind is not your mind. You know, you can't read my mind. And if I want it done a certain way, it is my role, my job, my duty to tell you how to do it. And if I hold you accountable to something that I have not explained to you, shame on me. That's leadership 101, guys. If you're, if you're trying to coach others, if you don't make the expectation clear and you don't give them the pathway to do it the right way, and then you hold them accountable to it, you've set them up for complete and utter failure unless they can read your mind or they just happen to know this skill from, a prior role. I think that's the difference in like a lifestyle owner and like a true CEO. As in a lifestyle ownership model, it's like we're all in this together. We're all doing whatever we can do to get it done. And at some point, you move from that to we're a real business. We have division of labor. We have leaders that do certain things. We have, our own lanes in some cases that we need to stay in because of the processes that we put in place. We have metrics. We have performance reviews. We have accountability plans. That is not the same as saying this is like a part-time gig or even a full-time gig where I'm just going to hire whoever I can get in because I need to fill a butt in the seat. That's a much different mindset and so much more coaching and intensive development of your people and looking at the metrics and long-term growth. It feels way different, and it's not going to happen overnight. I think no one starts a med spa and says, "I'm going to be a CEO today." It might be on your business card, but you're not there yet. You have to do a journey of kind of learning what the differences are and leaning into this other part. It's very professional ownership versus, I'm figuring out how to get a bookkeeper and get my taxes done, and are we open today or not? Very different worlds. And I'm sure you have the growing pains with your clients all the time, Erin, about when does that transition occur and how do you start to prepare for that on day one to become that professional CEO?
We get this a lot. So this one, we try to start with like, I always try to simplify things or at least put it into smaller chunks so that it's more digestible for that person. Because again, if you're a solopreneur at the moment where you're injecting, but then yes, you have admin and bookkeeping and marketing and HR and all of these different things, I start with your schedule. So if you can manage a calendar where you have put certain blocks of time to do certain tasks, where you have your client facing time or your patient facing time, you have your admin time, you have your numbers and analytics time, you have your marketing time, you have your bookkeeping time, and then maybe you also designate some time for research, time for, learning and doing a new skill, right? AKA having a coach, right? Carving out a time frame. I think if you start small with just, can I learn to manage my schedule in a way where I start to take control over where I'm spending time and what I'm spending time on? The reason why I think it doesn't happen that way is because structure requires discipline, right? And a lot of us, when we first get into it, we don't have that discipline. And so if you could get into the practice of just trying to have a similar schedule that is predictable, that you can get into a consistency with, then you start to move in a different way and you can be more efficient with your time. So we always say start with the calendar. If you can start managing your calendar and blocking out time for specific tasks. And the other thing is, it doesn't matter if you're the 0 to 5K or you're making 10K or even 50 to 150K. What you have to realize is at some point, if you really want that business to be a go, you will have to allocate time to grow your business. There's working on the business and working in the business. And at first, when you're, I would say probably that 0 to 15K ish, you don't necessarily understand the value of blocking 90 minutes a week to create content. You don't know what that value is yet because you're not tracking and measuring metrics, right? So, I know like I'm big on metrics too, because metrics just tell you what you need to be focused on. But I think when you can get up to about 15K, then you start to see, okay, I should be creating content, AKA marketing my business, gaining more exposure. And oh, also I need to reconcile that all of my financial records are somewhat in line, or hiring a bookkeeper. So I find like that 0 to 15K, there's a lot of things that you're doing on your own. Obviously you can hire if you have a bit of capital that you've set aside, you can do it sooner. But I find 0 to 15K is more where you're doing a lot of that stuff yourself. And that's where you actually need the most resources from folks who are ahead of you, or as you mentioned, a coach, a guide, a mentor, someone who's going to take you through those next steps because you don't know what you don't know. And then once you hit that next milestone, and then it might be time to hire your first person. Or how do I do that? Right? Is okay, now I need a structure. How do I hire someone? How do I create a job description or a job ad? How do I train them? There's so many different things that you have to learn, but I think people miss it because they don't necessarily understand the value it brings. Because if all you've really learned was trading time for money, or in our case, right, is trading time blocks of service for money, you might find that if I have to block 90 minutes, oh, then that means I won't have a client. That means I'm not making money. Not realizing that in that 90 minutes, you could create 3 weeks worth of content that would generate 15 new leads, which, again, if you know your average spend, would equate to a lot more than that one sale for that 90 minutes. So I think looking at business in a different way, and again, why a coach could help give you insight into what you don't know and how do you move through that a lot faster. So 0 to 15K, yes, you're wearing a lot of hats, but it's also an amazing time to get some of those resources under your belt, some tools and some help. And then after that, you're starting to divide your time a little bit differently between 15 to, let's say, 80,000. So I know that's a huge gap, but there's not much that changes structurally inside of your business in the sense of, what you're doing every day. Again, if you have your calendar going, but after 80K is more where I find most owners have to start taking a step back if they are the lead provider and the owner, where they're now going 50-50 or a 60-40 in terms of 40% client facing and doing, what they love, their practice, and then 60% doing the CEO stuff, the leadership stuff. Because at that point, you're normally having a larger team. And therefore, if you have a team, that means you need to step into leadership. You need to now have daily, weekly, monthly meetings. You need to meet with your accountant. You need to meet with your bookkeeper, your social media manager. You have to carve out time for a lot of these different people that help everything come together to keep that revenue climbing.
Yeah, I think you had some really good milestones there. I think one of the things too, even in our business here, is when you get to a certain level, if you are still the doer, you're now the bottleneck. You are the single biggest threat to your growth and profitability by far. Because if the whole thing depends on you to grow, but also depends on you to work and operate, you cannot be both. And I think that happens in every business. Is like as you start to scale your model, if you are the primary doer, the primary breadwinner of the practice, as you grow, you can't keep doing that because the business now depends on you to succeed, and you have to spend time. It's now your new baby. You got to trade the syringe for the swaddle. Your new baby's now the business. And I think that happens so often in an entrepreneurial role because you don't know when that cutoff happens. Like you don't. One day you wake up and you're like, "Oh crap! I'm the reason we're not growing because I am too much in the weeds all day." And I think it kind of happens. You don't even know it's happening. And it's like one day you wake up and it's this realization of, I've got to have help, or I've got to have people supporting me in different roles. And so I'm a big believer, Erin. I don't know how you look at your day, but I did this every day of my life, all the time. I know what I cost per hour. I know my cost to my business. I know my cost to my consulting clients. I know what I cost per hour. If doing a job will cost me more per hour of my own time than hiring someone to do it, I need to hire it out. There is always like a cost benefit analysis for me. If it's like if I need to do the social media content thing of whatever it is, and it's going to cost me more than X to do it myself, find a person on Fiverr, find a person on Upwork, get a freelancer. Because at some point as a CEO, if you work in in an enterprise, that's how you live your life. It's always about units of time and dollar spend. And I am expensive, I'm sure you are as well. In the context of like a $5 freelancer, like they're way cheaper than me. Have them do all the work because you cost spending your time on things that are not moving the business forward but are still critical is a waste of time. They're critical but not urgent. If it's urgent, I get it, but critical and urgent are not the same word. They're not the same emphasis of context. Go hire a freelancer. I'm all about when you are young and small and agile, you can have a whole collection of freelancers for cheap on Fiverr, and you can operate like a big business for very little cost, and it frees you up to do things that you have to do at that size because you are the breadwinner. And then as you get bigger, you can say, let me get professional help who can do it all the time because now I can afford that and I can go be the CEO. And it just is this weird dynamic or continuum that you just don't know, but one day it just happens. You got to think about things so different. It happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to you. And it's just like a really like an aha moment. And I feel much different now. I'm much more free about that choice. And it's okay to say, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm going to hire someone else to do it. But that took a long time for me to be able to say that and feel confident that I wasn't being like an asshole. Like I'm too good for that. No, it's like, it's just going to cost us. It's going to hurt us if I keep doing it versus someone else. So I don't know how you feel about that, but it's always like one of those moments of like, oh gosh, I'm an idiot. I got to quit doing this stuff and let somebody else do it for me.
Oh, 100%. I am on the exact same wavelength with when it comes to that. And we see it all the time where I'll stop I'm talking to a client. I'm like, why are you doing that? And they're like, well, I know that I can just get it done and I've got a free hour. And I'm like, just because your calendar doesn't have something in it does not mean that you are free. And don't look at your time that way. 100%. I think it's so important that you always have to be aware that you're trading time for money. And when you can get out of that is when you start to learn that lesson of, okay, we need to use our resources. This is why we became successful, is you're using your resources to get your time back. But I think a lot of people get stuck on, well, what if I can't afford them? Or I don't know if I can afford this person, or how much is it going to cost me? And they're looking at the cost versus the benefit or what they save in time. And the main problem is because they don't actually know their numbers. They don't actually look at their metrics. They don't know their value every hour. They don't know what their average spend so that they can make that decision. Right. And so probably just like you, Tiffany, I know that, but it's also because we track, we measure, we know our metrics, we know our numbers, and we know the value of an hour of my time, of my team's time, of someone else's time. Right. And until you really dig into what is my average spend? How much revenue are we bringing in per hour? What is our, revenue per week, per month, per quarter, those types of things. You won't feel confident hiring someone out. Everything will feel so risky because you just have no idea. So if you're at that point and you're thinking, okay, maybe I am, the bottleneck and things aren't moving as fast because I feel like I've got to do it all myself, start to lean into what your numbers are, right? Look at your utilization, look at your calendar, look at your metrics of what does the business bring in? What is your profitability? All of these different numbers that, I could talk about forever because I love metrics, but those are the things that help you. And probably you would agree, Tiffany, is like, that's why it's just an easier decision for you, is you understand the cost. And sometimes it's not exactly a dollar value cost, right? It's also, as a leader, am I taking away an opportunity for a team member to learn a new skill that eventually I don't want to do? So I should learn to delegate this now so that when I'm ready to no longer do it, I have someone who could just step in seamlessly. So I always look at other things like that, as well as like, as a leader, you have to look for who on your team can get an opportunity to learn something that will take off your plate, put on theirs, and eventually it just becomes part of what they do. And you've now freed up your time again. I had a client recently who was still doing all the payroll. And part of that was like just pulling reports and then reconciling. And I said, well, why don't you do the first three parts, delegate that, train your front desk person to get it to a certain point and then hand it over to you? How many hours do you think you would get back? And she had never thought about it that way because she was just so used to having tunnel vision around payroll and certain things with her time. And she was like, oh, I never really thought to give it over to someone else because and here's another one, right? Is like they feel guilty because it's like, well, I'm the owner and I should be the person who does everything. No. Do you think Jeff Bezos, he's off in the Mediterranean somewhere on a yacht, right? He doesn't give a shit that there are people working 24 hours. That was the whole point, right? He was trying for 30 years to grow Amazon. It's now at a point where he doesn't have to, worry about what he's doing every minute, or is it helping to generate money? He's already built all of those systems. So I think it's as well, like, going back to the top of the chat here, is like, if you don't know the direction or the vision or the mission that you're on, you will find yourself lost or stuck for some time until you get real clear on what's important to you, so that you know where to put your time and attention, or where to bring in new resources so it can free up time so you can go and pursue further in that same direction.
Yeah, I think there's another part too. I'm sure that you're kind of in a similar role as me, that you do lots of practices, doing lots of different things. Is people want to talk to me because my name is on stuff. Like your name is on things. I'm the worst person to talk to, especially when they text me like, "Hey, I want to look at demoing AR. I want to buy AR. I want to do this. I want to do that. Can you get me this?" I'm like, I am not the person to call. I have a sales director. I have a whole sales team who lives, eats, sleeps, and breathes selling to clients. They have follow-ups. They have processes in place. They have automations. They are living this is their career. My career is to run a very complex ship of businesses and make them all tick. While I do love the fact that you want to buy AR, and I appreciate that, trust me, I do, I cannot stop running this Titanic to make the sale of a $16 user fee. It doesn't make sense for my business. And I owe it to you as a client to make sure this thing is working well so you get what you need as a client long term. To me, the bottleneck is also in the fact that when you are the owner, I think in the younger part of your business, continuum, you want to do everything, but you are not the right person to do it. And if you keep doing it, you are only going to hurt the business, because if I don't call the client back, follow up, do the things I say I'm going to do the email, I'm now, she doesn't care about her client. She's not paying attention to what's going on. It's like, no, the place just burned down and I had to go put out the fire. And that one email just was in a sea of 4,000 I have today. And I couldn't stop and do it. But you know who could? The sales team, because it's a sales lead and they are salespeople and they do sales. And the word sales keeps coming up here because that's what they do all day long. And so it's like one of those things too, I think, when you're in this world of even telling a patient when they text you and call you, it's like, I would love to help you with XYZ, but our esthetician is the expert in our skincare lines. Let me get you to her and she can help you. Because again, I'm in the back of a room either doing numbers or injecting. I ain't the girl, sis. Don't call me. But it's one of those things of recognizing that you want to help everyone. But if you do, it's only going to be worse. You're going to be worse off for doing it than if you said, nope, not me. Let's call someone else. And so I think people have a hard time. I've had a hard time with that for a long time. But then I realized if I keep trying to do it, I'm dropping the ball everywhere. And also, I'm dropping the ball on things that I've got to do for the whole, for the aggregate of our customers, because I'm focusing on one or two. And at the end of the day, the ends and the means matter. When you get big, when you scale, it matters big, way bigger than it matters whenever you're small. And so you can't sacrifice 75,000 for one, or the business won't work. And so you've got to start building, to your point, Erin, systems and processes and standards, or the ship doesn't move. I was watching the Titanic thing last night, one of those documentaries. So it's all about my mind. Like, the ship will sink, trust me. You don't want to be the person playing the violin as it goes down in the ocean. You want to make sure that you're proactive and prevent that iceberg from happening if you can. But I think that's one of those watch outs that it took me a long time to learn that I'm not the best at doing it. Let someone else do it instead.
Well, I also find that people have a hard time with FOMO. And what I mean by that is they're so, like, sometimes you have to get into the deeper psychology of who you are inside of your business. And essentially for the first year to 2 years, you are the absolute heartbeat, right? And then as you bring in team members and you realize, you could start letting go of little tiny things, people start to eventually get FOMO, because then they're like, well, this is a control thing now, right? It's like, do you guys not need me? What's really happening if I don't know everything? Like, I have a client that we work with right now. She's been in business 29 years. She has a robust, amazing practice, but she still every day gets her front desk team to send every client that came in today. And I was like, making the business case with her manager to show her manager how to position that this is the wrong thing to continue to do. But I think it's like, you're so, as you mentioned, right? It's your baby, and you get a little bit of FOMO because then you're like, well, people don't need me as much. And when people don't need me in my own business, where do I really fit in? Because you're kind of in that transition where you're not quite a CEO fully fleshed out just yet. You're still kind of the lead provider. And so that's a hard place to be in because you're a little bit in the middle. But I always say to clients, embrace it and just know that if your long-term goal is to retire or is to sell the practice or whatever it might be, create passive income and stay the owner forever, you have to start to delegate things. You have to get them off of your plate so you can go enjoy whatever, you want to be doing in the next 5 years. So I do find that people get FOMO. They want to be able to do it all themselves, but it's just not possible. And at a certain level of revenue, you can't be generalists anymore. You can't just have, 2 or 3 people on your team who are really good at pinch hitting for each other, because at a certain point, the volume that the business is commanding requires specialty. Someone, as you mentioned, right? Someone who's really excellent at admin or the back end tech, or it's customer service, or maybe you have someone who's doing sales consulting. So as your business grows, and I would say it's probably in and around the $50,000 to $75,000 a month mark, where you start to notice that, like, okay, we need to really refine our front desk practices, or have someone who's a little bit of a lead role in that to make sure that the standards are being met. or we need someone who's doing more of a sales consultant role, or again, name the thing, right? But it's more of a specialty. And though, like when you're at that point, that's usually when your business gets to that big next leap forward, because now instead of everyone being sort of good, right? That like jack of all trades, master of none, the generalists on the team, they really help you in, let's say, year 1 to 3, maybe longer, or from 0 to, I would say, about 50 to 75,000 a month. You could have generalists on your team, but then you're looking to be a specialist yourself in terms of what is your next move and who is on your team. So you can't just be sort of good at all the things. You really want to start building a team where you've got someone who's great with tech, someone who's great with customer service, someone who's great with it could be HR, it could be leadership. Because again, I agree with you. Just because you're the business owner doesn't mean you should be leading it or managing it. So yeah, I think it's like looking at where your business is, whether that's in years, but I always look at revenue, because sometimes you can climb really fast. I've seen businesses open and within 15 months become a 7-figure practice. So I think it's more that the volume of business you bring in will demand more from your team. And when that happens, you need to bring in more specialists and or create roles that are more specialty roles as opposed to generalists, because that's where, again, you'll get a bottleneck type of situation.
And I think there's also part about like task loading that's important here. I think about the front desk girls across America, God bless their souls. They get all the jobs that don't get done. You know, it's like you want the front desk girl to clean the practice when she's not busy, to do your social media when she's not busy, to film you in the room when she's not busy, to do your Aspire points when she's not busy, to do the check. Uh, if she's never busy, then okay. But what's her job? What's her real job, right? It's to be the patient concierge, to be the welcoming committee for your patients coming in. It's at some point you have to pair like with like, and jobs that don't make sense don't need to go together. And the front desk person, if you want them to be on demand, standing up, greeting, being a smiling, welcoming face, she cannot also be cleaning the toilets, doing your social media, putting up the groceries that you just bought, getting your dry cleaning, and also making sure that the patients are numb and ready to go and that the rooms aren't dirty. You cannot expect one person to do all those things at a level that needs to be done as a business is growing. It is impossible and implausible to think it's ever going to happen for you. So at some point, you have to stop and think what goes with what. If you need to have a person who's going to clean the practice, and hire a person to clean the practice who makes sure the rooms are done, that they're turned, that you have, your kitchen's clean, whatever. Different than your marketing person who's doing social media, filming you on demand. And then let the person who does patient-facing interactions do that. They're just, I think, at the generalist role, you start to stuff jobs in corners because they have to get done. And then all of a sudden, it's like these things they are completely opposite and they're hurting each other. I can't do them both or else I'm going to do nothing. It's like, it just doesn't make any sense. I think the other part of that is, and I'd love your thoughts on this, when you hire a second injector or you hire a new person, a new employee to come in and you feel like there's risk, right? You're like, oh, hiring the second person, oof, do I have enough patience, a patient load? I don't know. If you go into it with that mentality, then that's, first of all, that's a concern. But second of all, you have to be ready. Have an onboarding plan. What is the benefit to you as the owner? Can you offload jobs and patient load to that person? Can they build their clientele? Because at the end of the day, if you hire them and you don't give it all and don't throw whatever you have against it to try to make it work, it ain't gonna. I mean, you have to be willing to say, I'm going to let my patients go to Jane. I'm going to let my new people all go to Jane. Like, you've got to be willing to give it up, or she's never going to work. And also let's market Jane. Let's do promotions for Jane. Let's make sure Jane's a great injector. You've got to invest in that resource because now she is a cost until she's not. And I think that's a part of leadership, is like learning that when I bring in this person who could be risky, I'm willing to go ham to make sure she's successful. And I am set up for that. And I know I'm going to take a hit in my own productivity for 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks to get her up and running. And I can afford to take that hit and not get bitter about it and get mad at Jane because she didn't onboard in 4 days. Because I see that a lot too. They get mad at Jane. Jane's like, I just got here. I don't know everything yet. It's been 4 days. Like, yeah, but I'm losing money because I'm working with you. I need to be working with my patients instead. I just think there's so much around that, about your mindset, that you got to really think through that as a leader and as a business owner. About growth is tough. It's very challenging, and you got to be all in or it will not work.
100%. And this is where a leadership skill set comes in. So just to even go back to the generalist where you were naming off that, okay, if you have the front desk girl who's also cleaning up and dusting and doing the washrooms and then doing social media and doing the marketing and doing all these things, because she's a generalist, if you are a true leader, you're going to start to pick up on where is she excelling, and not only where is she excelling, and I'm saying but where is she excelling, but does she also love it? Where if you're a good leader, you will start to pick up on where can I use this person for the best position in the business. And then, you start to develop them for a new role. And so it's the same thing. If you are at a point where your business is now needing a second injector and your mindset is like, oh, I'm going to spend 2 to 4 days onboarding Jane, that's the wrong mindset. That is not, we can't recreate you in 4 days, can we? If you look at how long did it take you to get as good as you are? So why would we think it's reasonable to believe that Jane is going to be as good as you and take on your clients exactly as you do in 4 days? But I agree, we're using 4 days, but in general terms, most people think that. I always give the guidance around your onboarding, if it's a non-provider position, should be up to 4 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks, where you have an onboarding itinerary. They know what they're working on. Because also, let's get real, people have anxiety about new jobs. They want to perform, they want to pass, they want to do a good job. So if you can give them an outline of this is what we're going through each day, this is when you will have a break, gives them security of like, okay, I can check on my kids, or I can check on, whatever they got to do when they're going to have a break, or when they're going to eat or have a coffee or whatever. There are things that you can do that help to ease that process. So having that training calendar, a little itinerary of this is what we're going to go through each day and why, or this is who you're going to shadow, make it 2 to 4 weeks. And if you feel like that's too much of an investment, you have to really ask yourself, like, if I'm not willing to invest 2 to 4 weeks to create more revenue in my business, do you really deserve for your business to go to that next level? Because nothing happens that fast. And with an injector, I've seen some clients, they take 6 months to fully onboard a new injector. Obviously, you get to kind of call the shots on that. But the reality of it is that you have to train them in all of your standards, not just the ones that pertain to their position, because there will be general company standards and behaviors, your company handbook. How do you do all the things that you do and what makes you different? And then on top of that, if you're a provider, obviously you need to learn this is how we do it here with providing service or getting certain outcomes with treatments and things like that. So I think a good leader, you're really spending time with that person because you're looking at it as exactly as you mentioned, it's an investment, and you make that investment until it starts paying you back. And so if you want it to pay you back handsomely, you have to give it time to make sure that that investment is going to, sail off into the sunset for you. And so I think it's really important that when you're onboarding people, take your time with it, but also remember that you want to walk through every single person that you hire, doesn't matter position, walk them through all of your standards, your practices, your procedure, how you do things there, and have your probationary check-ins 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Because I see it happen so often where they'll hire someone, onboard them for 2 days, do a show and tell kind of training, and then at day 90 they're like, well, you're not that great. They've not checked in, they've not given any guidance, they've given no feedback. That person who's the new hire feels completely, lost or disenchanted that, you left them alone. And you, as the owner, feel like, well, you're not good enough, or you haven't been, keeping up with our standard, even though you've invested no time. So it's like anything. You can't grow a plant by watering it once and leaving it alone in the corner, checking 3 months later and going, oh, I can't believe it didn't water itself, right? So these are the types of things that you have to kind of look at a bigger picture overall. How are you really onboarding someone for success, and how are you stepping into a leadership role? Because what I've seen over years, and it's true for me, is like people quit bosses, they don't quit jobs. And if they don't have good structure, there's no mentorship, there's no guidance, there's no support, there's no tools, resources, even the best, highest performers are looking for structure, they're looking for direction and guidance, and they could fail at a job that is seemingly easy because they just didn't know what the expectation was. So that's where you step into that leadership role and start to develop skills around how do I actually structure the first 90 days of someone's employment here. What does that look like for us? How many meetings am I going to have? What am I saying in those meetings? Am I giving them feedback so that they have an opportunity to correct something or get better at it? If you just leave them alone, it's not really a surprise that it didn't work out.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think we often forget that it's a 50-50 match. it ain't just about you, right? You want them to be great, but they have to also like you. So I can't imagine spending 90 days onboarding someone. I'm like, it's going great. We're all happy here. Everyone's happy. And I didn't check in. And then it gets to day 90, like I quit. Like this is not for me. I feel like I've been left alone, out to, hung out to dry. I'm over it. And you've invested all this time and money to onboard, to hire, my gosh, just to recruit and interview and all the things you have to do with legal, to then have them walk away because they didn't like you. They didn't get what they wanted from you as a boss or as a leader. That's always a very, I think, a hard pill to swallow, but it is a 50-50 match. I mean, it's a marriage. You have to both like each other, professionally speaking, want to be together, feel like you have a passion that's shared and aligned, mission, vision, values, and goals. It takes two of you, and I think those frequent check-ins are so important. We here believe in big candid feedback, direct feedback all the time, constantly. We don't wait for performance reviews. We do it all the time. And I think it's important. If you see something, say something. Like the TSA, if you see something, say something around here. Because if not, you let it fester, then it becomes a big problem. Or it could have been just, nip it in the bud when it happens and move on. And I think that's part of being a leader as well, is that the conversations are tough. They're not always fun. They are uncomfortable. You don't want to have them. Firing someone is never fun. But the more you do it, the easier it gets. The more you take feedback that maybe is negative about yourself, the easier it gets to take it, because it becomes constructive and you figure out why it's being, why you're hearing those things. So I think if you coach your people from day one with feedback that's both positive and negative, they get used to it. It's not shocking anymore. It's like if I say now to someone on my team, hey, this was not very good. Like this was like 50% there. So it's like, try that again. They're not offended. They know that it's from a place of growth and development, and that I care about them personally and want them to be amazing, and that they did not hit the mark, but let's get you to where you need to go to hit the mark. It is not personal, but I think if you've never heard that before and someone says, you did not do a good job on this, it was only half as good as it should have been, then you're like, oh my gosh, that's so hurtful. You have to get people in the mindset of being coached. And I think that you have to coach to get them used to being coached. And if you don't ever do that, that first day of bad feedback is going to be a heart wrencher for them. And so there's just so many things along the way with hiring and firing, as you know, in HR, that I could go on for days about that, about getting your folks in the right mindset. But as Brene Brown says, clear is kind. Be clear with what you want and how you want it and how you want it delivered to you. And ask your employees to be the same for you, because if you're out of line, they'll tell you. Mine do all the time. They're like, what are you doing, you psycho? Quit doing that. But it helps keep me accountable to them. And I think it's equally important that I deliver what they want from me as it is that they deliver what I want from them. It's a two-way street. So, I think you got to be direct and candid and in the moment. Don't wait for a certain time to say it's not working. Jump in there and get it done.
100%. Yeah, I have the exact same leadership style where it's like, if something happened, I'm not waiting 3 days to talk to you because it feels awkward. So definitely having a difficult conversation, that is a skill, and lean into that, because throughout your career, if you want to have a big business, you're going to have to fire some people along the way, right? You're going to make some mistakes. You have to be able to sit in that more vulnerable state to talk about things that didn't go as planned or go as well as you hoped. And I think it's also important that if you are the leader, recognize that every single mistake, almost every single mistake, but let's just say almost every single mistake somehow has a reflection back on you and could have been partly your fault, right? So again, it's like if someone didn't pass probation, you can't just blame them and go, oh, well, the market's shit and like there's no good talent out there anymore, right? It's like, well, is that actually true? Did you do your best to groom that person, to train them, to support them and give them really direct feedback and guidance, right? Were you clear with your expectations? I love Brene Brown's work, by the way. And part of being a good leader is that you actually have the accountability on you, because it's like, well, if someone on the team made a mistake, we made a mistake. Or if we didn't hit a mark, right? Or if somebody didn't hit a sales goal, it's like, well, I'm partly responsible because maybe there's an opportunity for me to do this in a different way, train them in a different way. So if you're not looking in the mirror first when big mistakes happen or when something doesn't really work out, if you're looking outward to blame, you haven't learned the art of leadership just yet. Leadership is extremely humbling. And if you can, as you mentioned, right, if you learn to be coached yourself, you will be that much better of a leader, because you will understand that when you're leading people, you have to be vulnerable, you have to be transparent, but you have to have a lot of humility. You have to leave room and space for understanding. And it's not about right and wrong. It's how can we move forward, or how can we get a better outcome, or how can we, you know, learn more, do more, be more. So as long as you understand that you're part of that equation and it's always going to fall back on you to a certain degree, you show up differently, right? It allows you to step in and be more accountable and be part of that, maybe that new hire's journey.
Well, I think, Aaron, it's always your fault. That's what we believe here. It's always my fault. The sword that I fall on here every day is very long and very sharp some days. It is always my fault because at some point I did not coach or direct or instruct my leader of that team to do things the right way, to tell their person, to tell you there is a chain of command here, obviously. And at the end of the day, whatever leaves this business to touch a consumer, client, patient, vendor, whatever that is, I have in essence stamped it with my approval because of my people are doing it right under my purview, my responsibility. If they don't do their jobs well, that is 1000% my fault. And I think when you operate from that place, that girl getting up from the front desk and saying hi to your clients feels a whole lot different. Because if she doesn't, guess whose fault that is? It's yours. If she's not nice to a client, guess whose fault that is? It's yours. If a patient has an adverse event, guess whose fault that is? It's yours because the provider wasn't trained, they didn't have the right protocols in place, didn't know what to do in the event of an emergency. Whatever happens when you are the business owner in the eyes of the law and of the IRS, it is always your fault. So I kind of operate with that mentality here that I can fix almost anything that you do wrong because if not, worst case, I'll throw myself under the bus to do it. But because of that, I own the fact that I've got to also help you to fix it so that it doesn't happen again because it's going to weigh us all down. But I do believe when you walk through life knowing that whatever your people around you do wrong or right is a reflection of you. You operate from a much different place of we got to button this stuff up and make sure that things are done well because it's a reflection really of all of us, of all of our people here. Whatever one does well or doesn't do well reflects on all of us. And I think that is a growth and maturity thing that doesn't always happen in the beginning. It took me many years to get to that point of not being defensive about things, and that's just as you learn and grow. But it is definitely a professional maturity that you need your employees to have, and also you as a leader to have. And it takes some practice. Trust me on that. That sword is sharp when it goes right through your gut. Sometimes it doesn't feel so good, but you can get there, I promise.
Yeah, I still make leadership mistakes. I've been leading teams since I was in my early 20s and I still make mistakes, 20 years later. It happens because we're all human and we're still learning and growing and you know, feedback is the most important thing that I could, say about leadership. If you are going to be a leader, you have to be open to feedback. And for me, feedback, I had a team survey one year. It was 2014 or 2015. And the survey results came back. They were awful. They were so bad. Basically, everyone on my team was like, if we could fire her, she'd be gone. Now, I thought I was crushing it because I like numbers had never looked better. Profitability was super high, never been that high. You know, what I thought the goal was, because I thought with the numbers, I'm absolutely crushing this. And again, I use the word I'm crushing this and not we're crushing this. I had no idea how I was showing up or how I was perceived by my team. I was so hyper focused on our goal is profitability and our goal is high revenue and certain things around metrics that I totally lost sight of the fact that I had 30 other people on the team that were contributing to those results. And so when I got that feedback, like I literally cried for 3 days. Thankfully, I wasn't on property when I received the feedback. I was actually away on a different assignment. But my HR director had to call me to say, like, I have some not great news. I thought I was losing my job. Thankfully, I didn't lose my job, but it took me 3 days to get over it in my ego. In my head, I was like, what are they like? How is this even possible that people think of me that way? That's not who I am. But as I say, perception is reality. And so if you haven't done a team survey, I'm a big fan of team surveys. And if you can do it anonymously, that way, people they feel more open to give real honest feedback. And we have a sample one that we do, and we do it for different parts of somebody's role, right? Are you happy with your role? What about, where you sit in this company? The other part is, are you happy and satisfied with the job that you do? Do you have the tools and resources to grow and be successful? How do you feel about management? So we go into different dimensions of an employee's experience. And I remember when they did that for me and it came back, it was so awful, but it was the biggest lesson and the one thing that turned around my career. And I think I was only successful in all of those other countries and different projects because my team was brave enough to say, hey, you're shit at this job. And if you want to stay here, we've got to vote you in. So either something changes or like we're all quitting. Like, let's get real. Without your team, how are you going to grow your business? How are you going to make a bigger business? Because as a single person, there's only so much you can do. You're going to hit a ceiling. So whenever I think about leadership, it's like I think about service leadership and the people that you have. Because when you think that the thing that makes your business make money is the services you offer, you're wrong. It's the people, because the people you have are truly going to be your product, and why it's so important to have those mission, vision, values as your guiding North Star, so that when you feel overwhelmed or the business is growing rapidly, you all have a way to get back into sync and know what is that way forward.
And you want them to love it like you do. And if you're a monster, they won't. If you don't live the core values yourself and have the passion for it and the excitement for it, you cannot expect someone else to find your vision amongst a sea of chaos and believe in it. I agree with you, Aaron. I had some bad feedback early on in my career because I was, a defensive little pain in the ass, basically. I was very, very good, but being good meant I was a monster, and that's never a good place to be. But now I think, as you look at being more mature in your leadership role, obviously, here for sure with more and more employees every day, it's like they have to believe that I have what's best for the company at my heart, what's best for them. And if you don't portray that, they will not follow you. They will not work with you. They will not do more than what's asked of them. And I think that's very common in an hourly role, like a front desk person. It's like, I've got to align to a mission here, and I've got to align to a vision and align to a person. And if that person's not you, then I'm just here to get my paycheck. And I want them to be passionate about this job and be an entrepreneur and think about this as their career and their future. And it's my job to make sure that I keep creating that future for them so they can keep growing and making more and doing more and being more important long term. And so I think it just goes hand in hand. It's such a big part of, I think, what we do. When you're in the other part of the world, like corporate America world, you live and eat and sleep and breathe this because it's shoved down your throat. In med spa, where we don't often talk about it. So I'm loving the fact that Erin's as big about this as I am. But Erin, you do so many other things as well. Before we come off the show or roll off the show, I want to make sure we talk about what you do. You have a few programs that are online that you can work with you, some 8-week things that go on. So if our people want to get a hold of you and kind of work through their businesses and kind of pull the curtain back on their operations and have you poke around in there, how can they work with you to get that done?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously, you can find me on all the socials at the Spa Business Coach. We're very active about reaching out and answering DMs. We do have our signature 8-week program, and that really focuses on or opens up your mindset around 3 pillars in business that I've seen in my career over and over again, whether it's a multi-million-dollar operation or just starting out. The 3 pillars are numbers and financials, operations, team building, and leadership. And those are the 3 introductory areas inside our signature 8-week program. So that one you can find through our website, or you can DM me directly. And we're actually launching something in mid-August, so we haven't even announced it just yet. For those new starters, 0 to 5K, 0 to 10K, how do you get off of the ground, right? Because there's a lot to do. And as a new entrepreneur, it can feel so heavy. It can feel like a big energy investment, which it is, right? And so we want to help and guide you so you can get there quicker and make profit, make sure that your passion turns into profit.
And we share a lot of clients, and I can definitely attest to the fact that you have made some major big splashes in their businesses, made them better, stronger, faster, more profitable. I've heard phenomenal feedback all about what you do and how you work with your clients. And so I can't tell you guys that she's worked with me directly on this because I don't own a business, but all my clients say she's a rock star. So I would definitely recommend that you go find Erin. She's on Instagram. You can find her on LinkedIn, websites. I'll put all that in the comments for the show. But Erin, like I really mean that. I've heard such wonderful things about you, and I can just tell from the podcast that you are passionate like I am, which I love. And I think that, it takes people who are in this industry for the good of the business owner, the good of the CEO, the patient. It all works together for good. And I think we have to do a better job of helping people to learn those skills because, as you mentioned, you might be born with it, but not really. I mean, it does take some learning and flexing. And I just think leadership is a gap for us. And I can't wait to see what you're doing next with the smaller revenue numbers, the August program, to see how that's going to pan out, because those little babies grow up to be big, big practices one day. And so I think getting started on the right foot is so important. And you can't ever get back those first few years. It's hard to go back and turn the clock back. You want to start out with the right things already done for you, especially with the IRS, by the way, and legal things too. There's just some infrastructure things that are so important as you look at your numbers that you just have to get right in the beginning. And so I love that you're doing it. And, I think that it's a huge need, and I'm glad that you're going to fill it. So, but thank you for coming on today and sharing all your brilliance with us. And I want to see what you do next.
Thank you so much. Honestly, it's an honor. I'm so happy to chat with you today. And always remember, right? You can't make more time, but you can make more money. So at those early stages, think about everything as an investment, because you can't get that time back. You're so right.
I'm going to trademark that if it's not already trademarked. That was brilliant. You can't make more time, but you can make more money. Love that, Erin. Yes. Well, I hope you guys leave today and go make some more money, but we'll see you in the next episode of For the Record. Bye, guys. Thanks for listening to another episode of For the Record. This podcast is not intended to provide legal or medical advice. It's for entertainment, education, and information purposes only. For more information on this week's guest or to get started with Aesthetic Record, email us at info@aestheticrecord.com. Be sure to tune in next week for more fresh perspectives on disrupting the status quo and surviving in the aesthetics industry.